All right. So in the last video, we talked about how conferencing with somebody is a really helpful way to get feedback on your writing and to help you revise, right? And really, that's how most of revisions, and no matter what we do, happen, right? Like if you're playing basketball or you're playing an instrument, your teacher, your coach um, will give you feedback as you're playing, so that you can just keep getting better and better and better, right? And the same thing goes with writing. So after meeting with Barbara, I thought she made some good points, and I thought I added some good connective tissue that I highlighted here in order to have a more developed answer. But the tricky thing about this question, and as you kind of get up there and more questions, it keeps happening, is this question has two parts, right? I have to answer, how does the scene affect the theme, and how does the theme add to the plot, not just the theme or the plot. I got to do both of these, right? So when I reread my response, even after getting the great feedback from Barbara, I feel like I still hadn't fully did the plot part. I feel like I talked about how we get to theme, but not so much plot. So what I did is a little trick to get my writing more developed, and it's called depth charging. And with depth charging, you simply find a sentence in your writing that you think has an interesting word or phrase, and you can circle it or highlight it or underline it, whatever. And then you add some more writing underneath to develop that. And I'll show you what I mean in a second with my writing. And then you check to make sure that it all flows. All right. And you just do this until your writing has gotten where you wanted it to go. So in this, I thought wrestling with his identity, the kind of the last part here, after I tweaked with Barbara, was really a cool idea that I hadn't fully developed when I reread it. Like, I talk about the Barbara wrestling with his identity, but what does that mean? What does that look like in the text? So I underlined it or highlighted it, and then I added more to that, and I tried to really flesh that out. So I added, as soon as Captain Soares comes in and asks for a shave, the barber is confronted with having to prioritize his values. And these two ideas kind of go together. That's why they're highlighted. He's wrestling with his identity, and he's also having to prioritize his values. By mentioning first he's not a murderer, we know that he identifies as someone unwilling to kill, even for a cause important to him. Then he mentions his place as being a barber, so we know that being a barber is also important to him. By the end of the scene, the barber makes no mention of being part of the revolution, illustrating a hierarchy in the barber's character. Not a murderer first, two, a barber, and three, a member of the revolution. So I felt like I kind of explained here um, that we see some really interesting and important character development for the barber. And this is kind of like what the whole story is about, right? Who is the barber really when we think about it? But I still feel like I didn't explain maybe how the scene got to plot. Like, characterization is part of plot, so I definitely did that. But I also didn't explain like how it just like moved the story forward. How does this event link to the next event? So I depth charged one more time, or added things one more time, and I felt like the part that I needed to develop this part this time was the scene. What is the importance of this scene? Okay, so this is what I added. So here's the old part, you can see here, and I just wrote the word again because I thought it was important to kind of have that as my transition to keep going. So the scene also sets up the twist ending. By not killing Captain Torres, we learned that in the next scene that Captain Torres was testing the barber by leaving his life in his hands. While the barber and the reader, me, and the barber are both surprised by Captain Torres' courage to not only risk his life by being shaved by the member rebellion, we learn that Captain Torres already knew the barber identified as a peaceful man, not a murderer. Okay, so um, by doing this little trick called depth charging, you can see how I added to the part above. All right, and all it is going back and reading your writing and finding something that you said that was interesting, but you didn't fully elaborate on. And if you have a hard time identifying that, that's another good reason to find a partner or ask your teacher, say, hey, where could I add to? But I always think it's best to start with this on your own. All right. So we talked about two techniques now to help you become a get better writing. First is conferencing with somebody, just having somebody read it and getting some feedback. It's always good if you can ask them a specific question like, am I missing X? Or what did you think about this word or phrase? Then they can give you more specific feedback based on what you need. So that's one strategy. And then the other strategy is called depth charging, where you find a word or a group of words that's really interesting that you haven't fully developed and you just keep adding to it. So this is a great strategy when you're working by yourself and you don't have a partner to go to. Maybe it's too late, or maybe it's the weekend and teacher's busy, etc. So those are the two strategies that you can use. And then when you're done, this is just a checklist, and I think my writing now finally passes the test. So the first one is that I answer all parts of the question, right? This question is a little tricky because there's two parts. I got to talk about the scene and how it advances the plot and how it adds to the theme. Those are the two things. Do I have text evidence, direct or summarized? And I have a little bit of both. Do I tie my text evidence and answer to get the commentary? Yes. Do I explain what the text evidence is doing and how it's doing it in the story? And then do all of my pieces of my response make sense when I read them aloud? Right. So it's always good to go back and reread your work and say, okay, does this make sense? And that's always another good reason to have someone read your work before you turn it in, having another set of eyes of feedback. That's a great time to use conferencing. Is just, hey, does this make sense? It made sense in my head, right? And sometimes those wonderful ideas are kind of like alphabet soup swimming around out there, and when you get them down on paper, they're not all in the great order that you want them in, or how they looked in your head. So that's another time to use conferencing. All right, so those are our strategies. I hope those help you, and I hope you guys have some great writing to show us later.